Welcome, pudding people, to another episode of Everybody Loves Pudding. We are here today with a fantastic new guest, Mr. Paul Sidhu, an actor, a producer. I'm assuming he's also an expert in all things medical.
Right.
How are you doing today, good sir?
I'm doing good. Thank you. Thanks for asking.
I have to say I'm kind of I was saying a moment ago, I'm kind of excited about the chance to talk to you because we get a number of really interesting people to speak with, but a lot of times we have let us say a more American centric experience. A lot of people that have local film experience, but you've had some international film experience as well. So it's always really exciting to get kind of some some experience from that. But you didn't always start in acting. When I was doing research, it said that you began your career as a dermatologist. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yes.
That's quite a shift. How did you go from the practice of medicine to going into acting?
Well, in the beginning, I really had no aspirations or intentions to enter the entertainment industry or act. So the formative years of my life were spent pursuing medicine, studying, going to medical school, doing my training, and that's what I was focused on, and I really enjoyed it. And and I loved the experience. So eventually my training brought me here to Los Angeles at USC, and I completed my specialty training at USC, and then went into practice and had a lovely time. But while here in Los Angeles, I befriended or became friends with a lot of individuals in the fine arts and in the arts in general. And I sort of had a cultural renaissance of my own, where I was a different side of my brain started operating, and I looked over to see what these guys were doing, and I said to myself, wouldn't it be great to do something like that in addition to and as well as what I am. So that's how it began, basically by physically moving to Los Angeles and then physically being surrounded by people in this industry, um and that's what sparked the desire.
That's really kind of amazing. I absolutely love hearing the stories about how people get into acting. It's sometimes it's fun to see. I've been in it my whole life. My parents were this and they trained me, but it's always really fun to see the left turn to go from a different profession into it. How did you just kind of jump both feet in, or did you decide, I did my training in medicine, I'm going to do my training in acting too, and then go to like an acting school? How did you really get your start?
So what I did was, I basically decided to produce and write. That was my entry into it. I was looking at the landscape when I started, and this was back in the early 2010s, and and I decided that I think it'd be more interesting if I could write a story for myself or co-write a story for myself, and then see if there's a way to possibly get that done and put it on the big screen. And at the time, one of the concept I had was, look, so I've spent the majority of my life in the healing arts. So fundamentally, that's why I exist. So I'm here, I'm trying to help people. And that's what I'm doing. So I said to myself, wouldn't it be interesting to play a character on the flip side of that spectrum? So somebody who's hired to kill people or hurt people. So we came up with that idea. We said, okay, let's have a protagonist who's a hitman, so to speak, and then we'll come up with a backstory for him. So we started this story concept, and eventually I ended up producing the film as well, and starring in it. And that's how I made my entry. But as far as the toolkit for the actor, I did not go to an acting school. As you know, in Los Angeles, there's a lot of acting coaches, and I'm not sure if you call them schools, but you more so call them studios. So I took advantage of that, where I could go in daily and weekly and work on the craft as well as work on the screenplay. So that's the route I took. So I had the screenplay in my hand first, and then I sort of centered everything around that.
Was that a Kari decision?
That was Aukrey decision. Yeah, that was the first one.
I knew I was going to mangle that as soon as I said it.
No, that's all right.
So that was kind of one of the first things that kind of intrigued me. I looked at that, and it's got a cast of a lot of names that most individuals may not be completely familiar with, but it does have some names. If you've seen enough movies, you start to recognize. It's like, oh, okay, I know a handful of these individuals. When you created this script and you got it, I'm going to make this film. Did you have an idea of who's like, I know I want to do this. I want these people to be involved for a specific reason? Were there like dream castings that you had that you wanted to be involved in that film?
No, there was no dream casting involved at all. So when we first started writing it, we were very anxious and a bit apprehensive during the pre-production process, because here we were guys from the United States. We're going to shoot a film in Mumbai, India. We're going to shoot it in their language, because since culturally I'm from India, I wanted to do a film in India and about what informs us about that society. So we were very worried, like, we're not going to get anybody to work with us. Like, like once we crossed the ocean, it was like, who are these guys? These random dudes from Los Angeles. But fortunately, what we found was, as we started circulating the script through casting directors on that side of the world, there was interest, and we got a lot of these wonderful actors to come in and join the film. And each one of these actors that was involved with the film, I mean, they've had like swaths of experience, multiple movies, multiple dramas, etc. Not a single one wasn't a veteran.
Right.
And going into that as an actor for the first time was extremely rewarding, because I could sit back between the takes and really watch these experts and learn from them and talk to them, and really, I got tutored a lot during the filming as well. I mean, the veterans there were not shy about telling you, like, hey, I'm not sure why you made that choice. And then I'd have to explain myself, this is the reason why. And then, they'd be like, maybe you can think of it this way too. And so it was interesting, even though like I helped write the thing. I still had a lot of learning to do. And it was like a crash course in drama school. So it was cool.
And that can be crazy too, for somebody that's watched, some would say, an excessive amount of cinema. It's kind of a joy, at least for me, to see something from a completely different, either a completely different point of view, or something that there's this whole other world of cinema that many of us just don't get exposed to. And when you just kind of get a chance to go down that rabbit hole to see some of the work that some of these individuals have done, and it's really kind of amazing. Now, were you already by chance familiar with several of these individuals before you started, or was this kind of new to you as well?
So when they were casted, and we, the director at the time, he showed me, okay, this is the guy who's going to play the commissioner, this is the guy that's going to play his wife. As soon as he showed me the pictures, I was like, I know these guys. I was like, I was like, I know these guys. And I was like, really? You got these guys? And they were like, yeah, we got these guys. And I'm like, how did you get these guys? And they were like, they were cool. They were interested. They wanted to come on board. And I was like, really? I go, do they know that they're working with me? And they're like, yeah, they know they're working with you. I'm like, okay, all right, well, let's do it. So it was great.
That's awesome. All I can only hope is it's still kind of one of those things you get to see the occasional the occasional crossover. You know, I'm a big fan of comic book films, so seeing, you know, a couple of individuals pop up in the Eternals, or you know, things like that, you get a little of the crossover. It's still, I still think there's going to be this point at which there's going to be a greater acknowledgement of the broader theatrical world as it is. But I don't know if we're quite there yet, but it feels like it feels like it's getting there just a little bit.
I would agree with you. I mean, if I don't think you need to look any further than Netflix and what's trending and what they're really promoting. I'm seeing like a lot of foreign films, like from Portugal, Spain, Poland, Italy, Korea. It's the Middle East. It's pretty cool.
So here's a question we'll ask you. Each kind of filmmaking area has its own kind of shorthand that it uses. Certain things that you'll see in movies, you know, like the meet cute or things like that, that are just kind of standard elements that you'll see that sometimes communicate a very specific concept that the viewer is supposed to acknowledge in a film. Is there anything like that in, say, Indian cinema that is completely different? You know, just this is something you'll see in a lot of Indian films, and this is kind of what it means, or something that's kind of got a place in your heart from the history of what you've watched in the past.
So I think that Indian cinema relies heavily on music and dance to tell a story of relationships. So if there was a relationship between two individuals on screen, instead of going through the specific scenes of, here they met at a coffee shop, here they went to lunch together, and then they went on their first date, etc. they'll they'll do that story in a montage. So the purpose of the sequence is not just to throw in a dance sequence, so it's not just, oh, we're going to put in a dance sequence here, although there are some movies that do have what are called like item numbers, where they just have certain song and dance just for fun, but it's within the context of the scene. But mostly it's telling a story, and if you're listening to the lyrics of the song and you're understanding the relationships between the characters, just a beautiful way to express their vision. So I think that's the big difference. Breaking out into song and dance is pretty common in that part of the world's cinema. Yeah.
Well, it's just kind of a nice, bright way to tell a story. Musicals have always been a part of a variety of cultures, but the mechanic in which that they're used is very interestingly different depending upon what section of the world you're from. So, okay, so I had meant to ask this a little earlier, but then I got excited and carried away. But so talking about early films that you had seen, is there anything that you really draw inspiration from, thinking back to whether it's current day or whether it's early life? Are there actors or styles that you go that kind of help push you into the direction that you've gone now?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, some of the films that informed me and really I connected to was, well, there was one, obviously, the original Blade Runner. For one reason or another, that really captured me when it was first presented, and it's something that you sort of like go back to and look at, because it's a great character-driven drama, even though, there's action and there's sci-fi and etc. And I happen to be like a sci-fi nerd, so that was always like a great calling. So, films along that genre, those character-driven dramas really really informed me, and I think molded the way I wanted to tell stories, or the type of stories I wanted to be involved with.
Yeah, Blade Runner is a great choice. The background is almost its own character in that
Yeah,
particular film, and it lends an ambiance that just helps the story be told over the course. Plus, the story is just fun to begin with, and yeah, if you're going to pick an influence, I'd have to give a kudos on that one.
all right,
That's
cool.
such a fun film. Is that kind of why you were involved with the 2307
Yes,
Winter's Dream
yes,
film?
for sure. Yeah, when we were trying to think of like what to do next, science fiction came to mind, and that's the direction we went in, and we borrowed heavily from movies like Blade Runner, Star Wars, things like that, like the classic, science fiction films. Kind of had the I'm gonna use the word borrowed, but I'm sure the critics might be like, "Hey, these guys are pawning off these films." But we were. I mean, it was so obvious that we were totally aware of what we were doing, like the little holograms. I mean, that's from Star Wars. Concept of humanoids, that's from Blade Runner. So yeah, it was fun. It was cool though.
Uh, it's just there's no real new ideas. I mean, that's been said a million times because that is also not a new idea. But there doesn't need to be new. It's the spin that we put on it. It's the polish, the presentation
Right.
that can give that joy. What was your favorite part about working on 2307? Was there just that little nugget that still sticks with you?
Well, I gotta say, working on 2307 was a very special experience. And I think part of it had to do with the fact that as you know, for independent films, once the financing comes through, there's not a lot of pre-production time wise. If you look at it, you might spend a couple months in pre-production, and then you're moving into the film and you're trying to get the film done. With 2307, we spent about over a year in pre-production. And the reason why was the writer, which was Joey Curtis, he also co-wrote Blue Valentine. He was writing the film off my story concept. So we spent 6 months going back and forth discussing the screenplay. And so the screenplay became second nature. We understood every aspect of it. And then also Joey ended up directing the film. So then we spent another 6 months in training dramatically for the film. Like we wanted to go through the scenes, examine them, explore them. So all that prep, and then going into Western New York when there was like a snowstorm, the location became practical. It was like freezing cold there. It was a completely immersive experience where we were like miserable as far as the cold, and our suits we were basically had biker suits on, and we were pretending they were like, these advanced, sci-fi Spartan suits, but they had no insulation, and that whole experience was raw and hardcore, and it was just a great experience overall. Just loved every aspect of it. The camaraderie that the entire team had during those harsh conditions, and all the effort and the work that went into it was amazing. Our producer Robert Beaumont really bent over backwards to make sure we had all the elements we needed. So it was great. Really nice experience.
So here's a question that I have. When you are writing the material, this is your baby. This is your story.
Yeah.
But it's a collaborative process in order to create it, to make it come to life, which I would assume requires a certain letting go of an element of control. over the process. How do you kind of go through that? How does that work to be able to kind of put yourself in a mental position where I go, so, okay, I know this is the way I want it, but some things might need to change. How do you prepare yourself for that?
Well, you have to go into it with the mindset of being collaborative. So understanding that this is a collaborative art. And so when you go in there thinking that, it doesn't become very difficult. And what I'll normally do is, let's say, I have a writing partner, Robert Mearns, and what I'll do is I'll write like a scene, let's say, and I have a certain tone to it and a certain style, then I'll give it to Robert, and Rob, he might be like, hey, I don't understand why you did this or did that, or what's the character thinking here or that. So you basically listen. You're trying to open up yourself to, creatively absorb everything your partner is telling you, and then you sit on it. So we always like tell each other, let's let this percolate. So we just sit on it for like a couple days, and then it sort of comes to you, like you start to see the other person's point of view. And then, invariably also the other person sometimes comes around and sees your point of view, and they're like, well, wait a minute, you were right, let's just leave it the way it is. So I think you just got to be open, and you got to understand that um you know I think when you're trying to make something special, you just have to collaborate. The exceptions are um individuals who I think like are on sort of that genius level where they're going to be writing and directing. So, that's the category of, like, let's say a Quentin Tarantino, where he knows what he's already visualizing the scenes as he's writing it. So for someone like that, yeah, you're probably going to just do what you got to do and maybe not be too open. But I think for the vast majority of people, you have to be open to ideas.
Have you had a memorable instance in one of your projects so far where you've written something and then the finished product has turned out drastically different from the way that you had originally positioned it, and just gone, wow, that is way different, but that's awesome that it turned into this?
So I think that happens in more so in the edit. So that's kind of like where I see the biggest changes. So there's some films I'm involved on where several of the films, obviously I'm just strictly the actor. I'm just the actor for hire. I'm not the producer or the writer. And I'll I remember the scene clearly, and I remember the takes, I remember the coverage, and I have in my mind like, okay, so this is how the scene went, and this is how it's going to go. And then, it's handed off to the editor, and they put something together that you're just sort of sometimes amazed by. You're like, wow, that I was like, I thought that was kind of, this is how I imagined it, but it turned out to be so much more. So I think a lot of that for me, whether it's just from the actor's perspective or if it was actually a film that I've written on, like Escape, I'll see like in the edit how things will change. Now, the other instance that'll happen is when you're in the moment with a particular group of actors, and then they'll inform the scene and change it around and make it their own. And so that'll happen. And invariably when that happens, when the actors get involved and they're like, hey, let's let's try it this way, or maybe I could do this dialogue as opposed to this dialogue, it invariably makes it better. It's always better. I think. I always think it's more personal to them, and when it becomes more personal to the actor, the performance becomes more personal, which translates into just a higher quality cinema.
So thinking forward, yeah, you've had several different projects that you've been involved with, several that are going to be coming out uh, fairly soon. Is there something that you have wanted to do that you haven't done yet, that you've got kind of this idea, maybe just a little egg of an idea at it is, have you always wanted to be in like a big budget, like a Broadway show style thing, or have you ever really wanted to be in like the MCU? Have you ever wanted to be one of those people that gets to wear tights for a little while in front of a green screen? Is it what? Where do you see your trajectory going forward?
So yeah, I have friends in the industry, and they're kind of married to the concept of wanting to be in a particular franchise or affiliated with a certain universe or company. I, you know, I I'm not. I'm basically looking for, what I look for is a really interesting screenplay, and then fundamentally a character which I feel I can explore and make unique, something unique from what I've done in the past. So, I did some serious action thrillers and sort of like these heavy characters, and recently I was able to do like a rom-com, if you will, kind of like that. And so I'm always looking for ways to um do different roles and not necessarily the same thing. But I think it's just the story. I think the story has to be super interesting. I mean, there's epics I love, like for instance, the Lord of the Rings, for instance, like, the original Lord of the Rings that came out like 10 years ago. Those are just beautiful epics. And who wouldn't want to be like in something like that? But again, it really boils down to what's the story, what's the story, and what's the character, and then are the people who are putting it on, are they fun? Like, are they fun to be around? Because you're going to spend, a good portion of your life with these folks, and it is art, but at the same time, it's life. You want to have some fun and enjoy yourself.
And the rom-com, that was Uppercut, right?
The rom-com is Uppercut. The director likes to refer to it as a bromantic comedy because the character is, it's kind of a coming of age story of the character. He's informed by a female boxer who's his client. She kind of, turns him into a person, but at the same time, he has this guy that he really looks up to and like really emulates. And so it's a real nice story, and it's funny and light, and it was a great shoot. I just really, really had a good time.
I have a special soft spot to the romantic comedy. It's friends of mine have called it kind of like junk food, in the sense that it doesn't have a lot of core value on its own, but it makes you feel better once you've once you've eaten. It's like, I don't know if I'd go that far. It speaks to a certain element of romanticism that is ever present, hopefully, in each of us. Do you have a specific rom-com that just kind of is one that you've always loved, that kind of maybe maybe even possibly could influence a performance?
Oh, that's a tough question because I traditionally don't watch rom-coms. So, so, so that's tough. I'm gonna have to like, oh boy. You know, some of the funnier ones, like I really liked oh man, like I'm trying to think of a good one there. Um so what is that? Boy.
If you like the adventure element, go back to the 1980s, Romancing the Stone. That was a classic back in the day.
There you go. That's a good one. Okay, so that's a romantic comedy. Yeah, I guess you're right. I always viewed that more as like a kind of yeah, romantic action thriller, romantic comedy. Yeah, Romancing the Stone. That was good. Thank you.
I like to have a little something added into romantic comedies on their own can be fun, but if it can just add a little something, like Hugh Jackman had one with a number of years ago that had just a little bit of time travel involved. So you just add that
Okay.
little extra seasoning into it, and it makes it all new again.
Okay.
Um, so I have to ask about this. I'm really curious. The repeater. We talked a moment ago, or a little bit ago, about having such an amazing cast of people that you're able to work with on the decision. But you did it. You kind of have it again on the repeater, just with a different crop of individuals. I saw the list of talent that was involved with this film. Do you ever get the point where you walk on set and you're just kind of starstruck? I mean, I feel like I would be like that all the time. It's like, I know I got a job to do, but I really liked you in Terminator 3. And
Yeah. Yeah, no, all the time. I'm always like, I'm constantly like impressed by some of the people I get to work with, whether, Christina Loken or Gary Daniels or Corbin Burnson, Nick Moran, all these cats on repeater. I've, you know, seen all their work, obviously, from Terminator 3 to Harry Potter to, Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels, all that stuff. So it was it's always cool because it's fun because you're with folks that really understand the craft and what they're doing, and you get to learn, you get to play with them. It's fun, a lot of fun.
what was your favorite part about the making of Repeater? Was there a plot element that was really cool, a stunt sequence, or something that just kind of resonated with you?
Yeah, so I think the action in the film did resonate with me. It's a little different. You know, like for instance, Gary was explaining to me. So Gary was on the Expendables, and he's done like loads and loads of action films. So normally when you're on larger budget films, meaning studio films, you usually get some choreography, and you get about, you know 3 4 weeks. Some people even get like 2 months to like specifically train a certain sequence. But in our film, our action choreographer Art Camacho, who's wonderful, we literally had to show up on set. We understood the scene, we understood where the scene was going and what we needed to project as far as the storytelling, but the physicality of it was decided on the day of the shoot. So that was the crazy part. So we'd show up and
Wow.
we'd look at the environment. Art would be like, okay, this is what we're gonna do, guys. You're gonna come in here, you're gonna punch Gary here, punch him there, Gary, then you're gonna do this, you're gonna kick him here. And so we had like literally 30 minutes to an hour to go through the fight scenes, and then
Oh,
we had to do them. And so it was crazy. And the thing was, if it was just me, then the scenes would not have worked. But we had Gary there. So Gary like knows how to move. And Gary like really understands the camera when it's on him as far as fight scenes. And so he'd be like, he'd be like, Paul. I'd be like, what? He's like, you got to duck here, okay? You got to duck. I'm like, yeah, I understand. He goes, seriously, you got to duck, otherwise you're gonna get kicked in the face. So he would tell me like specifically like what to do in certain scenes, and so I just sort of like followed his lead. And yeah, we had a lot of fun. Even with Kristana, she did a she really understands action choreography, so it made things a lot easier when you're working with people who've done this so many times. So that was quite an experience. It was tough. The days were certainly difficult because you get bruised up by the end of the day, but it's a lot of fun.
right. So they literally just kind of made it up on the fly. They didn't have it like pre-done and you just didn't know about it. It was just done right there.
Yeah, there was no storyboarding of the action sequences because it was location specific. So they had a current concept in the script, like how this action was going to go, but then our location didn't match exactly how the script had described it. So we had to conform to the new physicalities. and then just, you go with the flow and on films like this, see where it takes you.
How does that affect when you're putting the film together? How does that affect continuity? Because I know that's the big thing when you're talking about editing earlier, making sure that everything flows from point to point within and between scenes. If you are just kind of on that point, does that make things more challenging in the production side?
Not as long as your second unit director really gets good coverage, and we had great coverage. Art was running a really tight show, so we had all the angles covered. So coverage wise, we were good. We didn't have any issues with that in the edit, so it worked out good.
That actually brings to mind a question I love to ask actors that specifically started in a different profession. Going into acting, was there something that surprised you? That before, we'd always watched films and television, but in the process of making it, you go and you start to do the thing and you go, I had no idea that X had to happen, or I had to approach this in this way.
I didn't realize how mentally challenging it would be to take on a persona. I always viewed it from the lens of, you know, this looks fun. So, I'm looking at these guys and wow, they're having a lot of fun. And you are, but in order to have fun, you got to put in the work. So you really got to get in there and understand every aspect of your character. Otherwise it just becomes a day full of anxiety. So I think that was the thing that surprised me, like how hard actors work at their craft.
Did you have anybody that kind of took you under their wing and kind of said, okay, here, young cub, I'm going to show you exactly the way that you need to go, or gave you a couple of just little pointers that has helped you up until this point?
Yeah, Tom Sizemore did that. Yeah, so
Amazing.
Tom Sizemore did it when we finished Winter's Dream. I auditioned for and got the part of Turk, which was opposite Tom Sizemore. It was a two-hander called Hustle Down that came out last year, and he's the funny guy, and I'm the straight man. And I just remember during the entire filming, first of all, he was really nice guy, really gracious, charming, but he'd always be like, Paul, come here, and I'd be like, what? He goes, let me tell you what Robert De Niro told me. I'm like, okay. Or let me tell you what Tom Hanks used to tell me. I'd be like, okay. And so like he'd always give me these nuggets, and like he goes, man, Johnny Depp. I'm like, well, from a distance I do, but he goes, well, let me tell you what Johnny Depp told me. I'm like, okay. So he would give me like, he knows everybody. He would tell me how their approaches are and what they're doing. So that was like really cool. And yeah, I my hat's off to that guy. So
That's awesome. So, kind of one last question about repeaters specifically. What what do you want audiences to know going into the film? What do you think that they should expect to be really I don't want to say entertained by, but something to focus on where you think that you and everybody, you just knocked it out of the park. This is the thing that I'm really proud of about this film.
I think you want to go into it expecting an action movie, obviously, but I think what the audience will be pleased with is the relationship between the different killers and hitmen in the film. So there's this relationship they have, and that relationship comes out through the film. And it's nuanced and subtle, but it really informs the movie. And like you were saying earlier, it's a standard movie, right? You're a hired hitman goes after a guy, has a change of heart, but it's the polish that was put on it and how it's presented and how the relationships are tantamount to the storytelling as opposed to the action. And I think that's what sets it apart.
I have to say, look, like I said, looking at what was there for the listeners that are not getting the video, that haven't looked this up yet. He wasn't joking about the people on there. Cristiano Loken and Nick Moran and Corbin Burnson. If you're not familiar, I mean, come on, Major League, Psych, Kiss Kiss Bang Bang, like he was saying. James Faulkner has just been an amazing amount of
Yeah, that guy was awesome.
productions. I mean, the whole cast is really really solid, and it looks like it'll be really really excellent. Now I don't know if you're as much of a pop culture geek as I am, in the sense that we tend to focus a lot on comic books and the intersection with films and
I
television.
love comic books.
Oh, okay,
I
excellent.
love them.
So what is your favorite, your go-to comic?
Okay, so when I was a teenager, I used to read the X-Men. I used to read Daredevil. Um, yeah, those were the two comics that I at the time found like very, very interesting. Yeah.
If you had a chance to play one of the characters from the Marvel or DC or Image universes, who do you think you would love to play?
Boy, that's tough. I'd like to put a different spin on the Green Lantern. That's DC, but yeah, I think there's I think that character could be approached differently. So
Oh yeah, absolutely. Especially considering it's like it's baked into the character. It can be anybody. It doesn't just have to be Hal Jordan or Kyle Rayner or Guy Gardner. They've managed especially in the recent years, to really kind of expand the ranks and kind of come at it from some slightly different perspectives. Yeah, I'd love to see that. Um, what about what do you think is your favorite story arc that you ever read in a comic?
in a comic, my favorite story arc, I think, boy, I'm trying to remember. I I think it has to be um I think it has to be uh Daredevil's arc. There's a there was like a if I recall correctly, there was a 10-part series about how Daredevil, well, Matt Murdock, in the beginning, he's he goes through this arc, and his identity is revealed. The Kingpin gets him. He loses everything. He loses Froggy or whatever, and all these cats. And I just remember that quote at the end, and he says, "And I have shown him that a man without hope is a man without fear." And I was like, damn, I was like, that really stuck with me. Like for, you know, even now I remember that. It was really cool.
So many good storylines. Now, I have to admit, I always size people up, especially if I get a chance to interview them. I go, okay, if I'm looking at this, I'm looking at this cat, and I'm saying, okay, judging by how he looks and kind of the way that he carries himself, who would I love to see this person portray? And when I saw you and some of the stuff that you've done, it's like, I bet this guy would be a great Mr. Sinister.
Mr. Sinister. Okay.
because he because the whole idea is, he carries himself in a very kind of almost regal way, and he's capable of a great deal of devastation, but only does it if he absolutely has to, and
All
has
right, cool.
fun in being the bad guy, as it were. And it's just kind of a great character, a lot of fun. um but yeah, so that's where I was picturing it. I was like, yeah, he'd be great, Mr. Sinister.
Very
Uh,
nice.
okay, so we have a couple of questions we ask every single person, well, nearly every single person that we talk to, because we are all about bringing people together, and there are certain things that everybody loves, and food is one of those things. That's why we're Everybody Loves Pudding. So we love to ask, first of all, are you a pizza person?
Pizza? Yeah, I love pizza.
If you had to pick any kind of pizza, what is your favorite? Are you a deep dish? Are you a Chicago style, New York slice? Where you go pizza wise?
I love deep dish pizza. When I was a teenager, I used to work at Godfather's, and they would let us have some pizza every now and then. So I'd always get the deep dish. Yeah.
Nice. I have to agree with you. Anytime I can get that little extra bit of crust, that thick sauce on there, that's the way to go. What about one other one that we talk about comics, but we also talk a lot about music. Are you a music minded individual?
I listen to all kinds of old genres, so I'm not particularly one way or the other. But growing up, I'd say I don't know, like I like some of the stuff from Ozzy Osbourne, like Crazy Train, things like that. Some of the yeah, so,
Uh,
some classical rock.
Nice, nice, excellent. So, do you have anything that you listen to if you're trying to you're getting into the mindset of a character? Do you have anything that helps you kind of get there musically right now?
So yeah, so that's a good question. What interestingly, like I think that some of the the composers out there, like obviously like Hans Zimmer, they know how to tap into the soul. I think that's what makes them so successful. When you're watching a film like Dune, or Gladiator, or any of the ones that he's done, the music is almost like 50% of your experience. So what I do, and it's kind of dorky actually, is I will set my whatever device I'm using to movie scores. And that's what I listen to throughout the day. So if I have a long drive, I'll listen to scores, and I'll let the scores take me to whatever emotional place it does. And then I'll kind of imagine different scenes with it, not necessarily from that specific movie, but from scenes that I think that, would be interesting to tell. So yeah, scores is what I listen to. No specific artist to get me in that state.
I love it. I love it. I have to agree. There are certain things you were even talking about. Lord of the Rings. A lot of what made Lord of the Rings work was that soundtrack was
Oh
just
yeah, yeah, beautiful.
amazing. I know I listened to the 2001 soundtrack a
Yeah.
lot of times to get into just a specific mindset. It's just beautiful. Well, I have one more thing to ask you for all of our listeners that want to pay attention to the new stuff that you've got coming out. What are the best ways to follow you on social media or any other way that would work?
So I'm on Instagram. My handle is the real Paul Sidhu.
I saw that. I saw a pretty awesome picture with a Mr. John Reese Davies that piqued my interest.
Oh yeah, yeah. He's an uppercut, and that was now that I gotta admit. So like that's about as geeked out as I got, because Gimli is like my go-to guy. I all his little one-liners. We. I'd say we're taking the long way around. I had him do those for me. I was like, "Come on," and he did them, and then I learned about like well, how did you come up with that? Did you read the books? How did you inform the character? And so, man, that was surreal. That guy's beautiful. He's really beautiful man. Love that guy.
It was deliberate.
Yeah.
Still sticks with me. That is fantastic. I want to thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us. I want to make sure that everyone listening does take the time to go out and see the repeater. It is on streaming services. It is available. It looks awesome. I just have to say it's so much fun. And if you haven't seen it already, take a look at Uppercut or 2307 Winter's Dream. A lot of great stuff coming out of Mr. Paul Sidhu. Thank you very much, sir, for being on the show.
Thank you. It's my pleasure. Really enjoyed it.